Michael here, looking at Psalm 78 for our devotion again today. This psalm, which may be subtitled, Tell the Coming Generation. And we're focusing on verse 55 through to 58 for the exposition today. Let's go ahead and read those 4 verses. Verse 55. He drove out nations before them. He appointed them for a possession, and settled the tribes of Israel in their tents. 56. Yet they tested and rebelled against the Most High God, and did not keep his testimonies. And 57. But turned away and acted treacherously like their fathers. They twisted like a deceitful bow. And 58. For they provoked him to anger with their high places. They moved him to jealousy with their idols. And as we turn to the treasure of David for the exposition, let's go ahead and read verse 55 again. He cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Spurgeon exposits. He cast out the heathens also before them, or he drove out the nations. Not only were armies routed, but whole peoples displaced. The iniquity of the Canaanite was full. Their vices made them not above ground. Therefore the land ate up its inhabitants. The hornets vexed them, the pestilence destroyed them, and the sword of the tribes completed the execution to which the justice of long provoked heaven had at length appointed them. The Lord was the true conqueror of Canaan. He cast out the nations as men cast out filth from their habitation. He uprooted them as noxious weeds are extirpated by the husbandman, and divided them an inheritance by line. He divided the land of the nations among the tribes by lot and measure, assigning Hivite, Perizzite, and Jebusite territory to Simeon, Judah, or Ephraim, as the case might be. Among those condemned nations were not only giants in stature, but also giants in crime. Those monsters of iniquity had too long defiled the earth. It was time that they should no more indulge the unnatural crimes for which they were infamous. They were therefore doomed to forfeit life and lands by the hands of the tribes of Israel. The distribution of the forfeited country was made by divine appointment. It was no scramble, but a judicial appointment of lands which had fallen to the crown by the attainder of the former holders, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. The favored people entered upon a furnished house. They found the larder supplied, for they fed upon the old corn of the land, and the dwellings were already builded in which they could dwell. Thus does another race often enter into the lot of a former people, and it is sad indeed when the change which judgment decrees does not turn out to be much for the better, because the incomers inherit the evils as well as the goods of the ejected. Such a case of judicial visitation ought to have had a salutary influence upon the tribes. But alas, they were incorrigible, and would not learn even from examples so near at home and so terribly suggestive. Verse 56. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God, and kept not his testimonies. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God. Change of condition had not altered their manners. They left their nomadic habits, but not their tendencies to wander from their God. Though every divine promise had been fulfilled to the letter, and the land flowing with milk and honey was actually their own, yet they tried the Lord again with unbelief, and provoked him with other sins. He's not only high and glorious, but most high, yea, the most high. The only being who deserved to be so highly had in honor. Yet instead of honoring him, Israel grieved him with rebellion, and kept not his testimonies. They were true to nothing but hereditary treachery, steadfast in nothing but in falsehood. They knew his truth and forgot it, his will and disobeyed it, his grace and perverted it, to an occasion for greater transgressions. Reader, dost thou need a looking glass? See, here is one which suits the present expositor well. Does it not also reflect thine image? In verse 57, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. But turned back, turned over the old leaf, repeated the same offenses, started aside like an ill-made bow, were false and faithless to their best promises, and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers, proving themselves legitimate by manifesting the treachery of their sirs. They were a new generation, but not a new nation, another race, yet not another. Evil propensities are transmitted. The birth follows the progenitor. The wild ass breeds wild asses. The children of the raven fly to the carrion. Human nature does not improve. The new editions contain all the errata of the first, and sometimes fresh errors are imported. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, which not only fails to send the arrow towards the mark in a direct line, but springs back to the archer's hurt, and perhaps sends the shaft among his friends to their serious jeopardy. Israel boasted of the bow as a national weapon. They sang the song of the bow, and hence a deceitful bow is made to be the type and symbol of their own unsteadfastness. God can make men's glory the very ensign of their shame. He draws a bar sinister across the escutcheon of traitors. And verse 58. For they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. For they provoked him to anger with their high places. This was their first error. Will worship, or the worshipping of God, otherwise than according to his command? Many think lightly of this, but it was no mean sin, and its tendencies to further offenses are very powerful. The Lord would have his holy place remain as the only spot for sacrifice, and Israel, in willful rebellion, no doubt glossed over by the plea of great devotion, determined to have many altars upon many hills. If they might have but one God, they insisted upon it, that they would not be restricted to one sacred place of sacrifice. How much of the worship of the present day is neither more nor less than sheer will worship? Nobody dare plead a divine appointment for a tithe of the offices, festivals, ceremonies, and observances of the certain churches. Doubtless God, so far from being honored by worship which he has not commanded, is greatly angered at it, and moved them to jealousy with their graven images. This was but one more step. They manufactured symbols of the invisible God, for they lusted after something tangible and visible to which they could show reverence. This also is a crying sin of modern times. Do we not hear and see superstitions abounded? Images, pictures, crucifixes, and a host of visible things are had in religious honor. And worst of all, men nowadays worship what they eat, and call that a god which passes into their belly, and thence into baser places still. Surely the Lord is very patient, or he would visit the earth for his worst and basest of idolatry. He is a jealous God, and abhors to see himself dishonored by any form of representation which can come from man's hands. Yes, yes, as it is written, so let us abide. God knows our hearts and our intents, and he gives us directions. May we be able to follow closely as he directed, and not to offend our God in any way. Trust you enjoy the meditation. Michael here declaring yet again, Jesus is Lord. Until next time, be blessed.